Something happened in India this week that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. The Secretary of State of the United States of America flew to India. He came because America needed something, not to issue demands, not to deliver ultimatums, not to lecture a developing country about its choices. He came because without India, America's grand strategy in Asia simply does not work. He came because the relationship between Washington and New Delhi had deteriorated so badly over the past year through punishing tariffs, through insults, through pressure tactics that backfired spectacularly that someone had to fix it, and that someone had to fly to India to do it. For 4 days, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio crisscrossed India. Everywhere he went, he carried the same message. America respects India. America needs India. America wants to start over. And India? India listened. Politely, professionally, but on its own terms. Because that is what a country does when it knows its own worth. Today, we are going to tell the full story of what this visit reveals about the extraordinary transformation of India's place in the world. Stay with us because every minute of this matters. Here is the question that cuts through all the diplomatic noise. Why did America come? Not why did it want to repair the relationship? Why did America have no realistic alternative but to do so? The answer lies in geography, demographics, and the cold mathematics of competition. A senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation in Delhi put it plainly in an interview this week. India, she said, is the only country in the entire network of U.S. allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific with the scale, the geography, and the military capability to truly rival China either at sea or on land. Hear that again. Not one of the countries that can, the only one that can. The United States has spent decades building an architecture of alliances in Asia, the Quad with India, Japan, and Australia, AUKUS with Australia and the UK, bilateral alliances with South Korea, Japan, the Philippines. All of it is designed around one central strategic goal, preventing China from dominating the Indo-Pacific, and none of it works without India. India sits at the center of the Indian Ocean, the body of water through which more than 80% of global oil trade and a third of all global trade passes. Indian territory borders China directly, across the longest contested land border in the world. India has the second largest military by active personnel. India has nuclear weapons. India has a rapidly expanding navy. India has missiles it is now exporting to multiple countries. Without India in the tent genuinely cooperating, not merely tolerating America's Indo-Pacific strategy, is structurally incomplete, and America knows this. Marco Rubio himself, before becoming Secretary of State, called the India-US relationship the defining relationship of the 21st century. Those were his own words. So when that defining relationship was strained to breaking point, Washington had to act. Not because it wanted to, because it could not afford not to. There was also the China factor, immediate and urgent. In the weeks before Rubio arrived in India, high-level diplomatic and trade engagement between Washington and Beijing had not produced the results America needed. The trade dispute between the two superpowers remained unresolved. The strategic competition in the Pacific was intensifying. America needed partners it could genuinely count on, not just in theory, but in practice. India is the natural counterweight to China that no other country can replicate. That is why Rubio was here. Not out of friendship, not out of sentiment, out of strategic necessity, and India knew it. Rubio did not begin his India visit in Delhi. He began it in Kolkata. That choice and everything that happened in Kolkata sent signals that diplomats, analysts, and journalists have been parsing ever since. First, the history. Kolkata is not just India's cultural capital. It is the birthplace of the American diplomatic relationship with India. On November 19, 1792, U.S. President George Washington appointed Benjamin Joy of Newburyport as the very first American consul to Kolkata. Joy arrived in April 1794, though he was never formally recognized by the British East India Company that then ruled the region, but his appointment marked the beginning of America's official engagement with India. Today, the U.S. consulate in Kolkata oversees American interests across 11 Indian states, including West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand, Assam, and the northeastern states. It is one of the oldest American consular missions anywhere in the world. Rubio was the first U.S. Secretary of State to visit Kolkata since Hillary Clinton did so in 2012. 14 years. But there was a more immediate political reason for the Kolkata stop. And it has everything to do with what happened in West Bengal recently. The BJP Prime Minister Modi's party has just come to power in West Bengal, a state that had been governed by Mamata Banerjee's Trinamool Congress for years, a state that had long been a stronghold of opposition politics, a state where American diplomatic and NGO networks had deep roots. Rubio's visit was the first by an international dignitary since that political shift. That timing was not accidental. Everyone in the room knew what it meant. And then came the decision that generated the most controversy. Rubio visited the Missionaries of Charity, the organization founded by Mother Teresa. On the surface, this appears to be a straightforward gesture of faith. Rubio is a practicing Christian visiting a famous Christian charity. Nothing wrong with that. But the context made this visit more complicated than it appeared. The Missionaries of Charity had its FCRA Foreign Contribution Regulation Act license revoked by India's Home Ministry in 2021, with adverse inputs cited as the reason. That license was subsequently renewed, but the organization remains on the regulatory radar of Indian authorities. The FCRA is the law through which India controls foreign funding to NGOs operating on Indian soil. And just days before Rubio arrived in India, an article appeared in the Washington Examiner by U.S. House of Representatives member Chris Smith, specifically raising the issue of India's FCRA legislation. The sequence article raising FCRA concerns, then Rubio immediately visiting an organization under FCRA scrutiny did not escape notice in New Delhi. India's response? No public statement, no reaction, just a calm, steady awareness that America's agenda extended beyond trade and defense. That awareness is itself a form of diplomatic sophistication. India sees clearly. India does not panic. And India responds in its own time, in its own way. Here is a question that has been discussed quietly in diplomatic circles all week. Did India just reject America? The honest answer is, India is not ignoring America, but it is giving a signal. Carefully calibrated, precisely delivered, impossible to miss. Protocol matters in diplomacy. Who meets you at the airport? What rank they hold? How warmly the official reception unfolds. The body language at official events. These things are not accidental. Every detail is deliberate. When Rubio arrived in Kolkata, the receiving arrangement was notably lower key than what a Secretary of State of the United States would typically expect. The warmth that accompanies a visit from a fully trusted ally was measurably, observably not fully present. State protocol was maintained. Official meetings took place. The conversations were substantive. Jaishankar met Rubio. Modi met Rubio. The Quad Summit happened. But there was a noticeable absence of the kind of effusive, enthusiastic welcome that would have greeted a partner with whom the relationship was fully warm and equal. This is not aggression. This is not hostility. This is India communicating through the precise, calibrated language of diplomatic protocol that the relationship has a memory, that the tariffs are remembered, that the hellhole post is remembered, that the claims about Operation Sindoor are remembered, that the visa restrictions affecting Indian students and professionals are remembered. India is saying, we are glad you are here. We value this relationship, but we do not forget what happened. And if you want things to be fully warm again, there is work to be done. This is strategic distance, not hostility, and the difference is crucial. A hostile India would have made Rubio's visit publicly uncomfortable. A cold India would have made it unproductive. India did neither. India was professional, constructive, and quietly firm. It engaged fully while making absolutely clear that engagement operates on the basis of mutual respect, not American convenience. That is the art of power. And India is getting very good at it. Jaishankar's masterclass India first on the record. Now we come to the moment that has been viewed hundreds of thousands of times since it happened. The joint press conference between External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Secretary of State Marco Rubio in New Delhi. Jaishankar was asked a multi-part question covering expectations from the Trump administration, energy policy, and the Quad. His answer was so precise, so confident, and so completely unambiguous that it has become a reference point for what modern Indian diplomacy sounds like. He began with this. He said, "The Trump administration has been very forthright in putting forward its foreign policy outlook as America first. Where we are concerned, we have a view of India first. Both of us are obviously driven by our respective national interests. America first. India first. Equal footing. No apology, no deference. No suggestion that India's interests are somehow subordinate to America's." Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the most powerful country in the world, was standing right there. And India's foreign minister told him to his face, "We are driven by our national interests, just like you." Rubio nodded. Because what else could he do? It was completely, undeniably correct. Then came the energy question. Rubio had arrived in India partly to sell American energy, to convince India to buy more U.S. LNG and oil, to reduce its dependence on Russian supplies that Washington has been pressuring India to cut for over a year. Jaishankar's response was a masterclass in diplomatic precision. He said, "For our energy security, it is important we have multiple sources. Large sources, dependable sources, cheap sources. The United States fits the bill in many respects. So do some other countries. We will continue to diversify and maintain multiple sources of supply at the most reasonable cost. Because at the end of the day, we have an obligation to our people to provide them energy at affordable and accessible rates." Every word in that statement was doing work. Large, dependable, cheap. America fits the bill, but so do others. We will buy from whoever gives us the best deal for our people. Not an insult, not a rejection of American energy offers, but a crystal clear statement that India will not be told who to buy from. India will buy based on price, based on reliability, based on what serves 1.4 billion Indian citizens. And then Jaishankar added something significant. He said, "What India does not want is to see energy markets distorted or constricted, because it has a cost implication. The American sanctions regime, the pressure on energy trade, the conflict around the Strait of Hormuz that Washington's actions have contributed to, all of these distort the energy markets that India depends on. And India is telling America directly that this has costs that India will not absorb silently." Then came the Quad question. Jaishankar reminded the room, with Rubio standing beside him, that the Quad in its current form actually started during Trump's first administration. He noted that he and Rubio first met on the very first day of Rubio's tenure as Secretary of State for a Quad meeting. India is enthusiastic about the Quad, but on India's terms as a framework for maritime security and democratic cooperation, not as an anti-China military alliance that India would be conscripted into. The distinction matters enormously. India shares a contested, active land border with China that is thousands of kilometers long. India cannot afford to be publicly positioned as Beijing's enemy. India manages that relationship on its own terms directly, carefully, and independently. That is what multi-alignment looks like in practice. Not sitting on the fence, managing the most complex web of relationships in the world, simultaneously, skillfully, and without losing India's own position. Now for the moment that the entire internet could not stop talking about. At the joint press conference, journalist Sidhan Sibal, a well-known Indian journalist, stood up and asked Marco Rubio a direct and pointed question. He said, "There are racist comments being made about Indians from within the United States. What does the administration have to say about this?" Rubio's response, "Every country has stupid people." Those were the words that went viral within hours. Because here is what Rubio either did not know or chose to ignore in that moment. President Donald Trump, Rubio's own boss, the man who sent him to India, had personally shared content on Truth Social describing India as a hellhole country. This was not some anonymous internet troll. This was not a bot account. This was the President of the United States. So when Rubio said, "People say stupid stuff, every country has that," he had entirely inadvertently applied that description to his own president. The internet noticed immediately. Now, in fairness, and this is important for accuracy, when Rubio was specifically pressed on the hellhole post afterward, he said, "The president loves India. The president is a big fan of India, a big fan of Prime Minister Modi. I would not be here if the president did not want me here." And indeed, President Trump did call into the U.S. Embassy's 250th American Independence Day celebrations at Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi during Rubio's visit, telling Ambassador Sergio Gore on a live phone call that India can count on him 100%, that he is a big, big fan of Prime Minister Modi, and that Modi is his friend. So the relationship at the leadership level remains warm. That is genuine and should be acknowledged. But what the press conference exchange revealed, beyond the viral moment, is something more significant. India's media and press is no longer afraid to hold the American Secretary of State accountable on Indian soil, in front of Indian cameras, in front of the world. An Indian journalist stood up and asked a question that journalists in many other countries would have been afraid to ask. And Rubio had to answer it. That is not a small thing. That is a reflection of a country that is confident in its own standing. There was one more moment from this week that deserves its own dedicated examination, because it was not just a press conference answer. It was a declaration of foreign policy principle, delivered face-to-face with the United States chief diplomat. A journalist asked Jaishankar about India's position in a world of multiple conflicts. How does India manage relationships with countries on opposing sides of global disputes? And Jaishankar gave an answer that should be studied in every foreign policy program on the planet. He said, India would be one of the very few countries that has very good relations and very strong relations with the United States, with Israel, with Iran, and with the Gulf countries. We have real interests there. The challenge in this situation is how to maintain all these relationships, how to protect our equities, how to advance our interests. We do not look at it as a zero-sum game, he continued. We will find increasingly in the world that there will be conflicts and difficult situations where India, because our interests are growing, has relationships with all the parties involved. We are seeing this in the Ukraine conflict as well, where we have very strong relations with Russia, we have it with Europe, we have it with Ukraine, and we have it with the United States. And then the question is, how do you manage them all? So in that sense, yes, it is multi-alignment, because today's India has that range of interests which requires managing multiple accounts where India's interests are taken care of. Multi-alignment, not non-alignment, not fence-sitting, not weakness masquerading as neutrality. Active, confident, deliberate multi-alignment. A foreign policy doctrine that only a country with genuine weight can successfully execute. A small country cannot multi-align. A weak country cannot multi-align. A country that depends on any single patron cannot multi-align. Only a country with enough economic heft, enough military capability, enough diplomatic depth, and enough self-confidence can sit across from the American Secretary of State and say, we maintain strong ties with Russia, and have America nod and accept it rather than walk away. That is the India of 2026. And Rubio did not push back. He could not push back, because America needs India more than India needs any single American demand. Now let us be specific, because the diplomatic language around visits like this can sometimes obscure what was actually being asked and what was actually agreed. What did America want from this visit? According to the State Department, multiple analysts, and statements made on record, America arrived in New Delhi with several objectives. First, a comprehensive trade deal, or at minimum, progress toward one. India and the U.S. had an interim framework that brought tariffs down from their peak, but a final trade deal remained unsigned. Washington wanted to move the process forward. Second, more American energy. Rubio said publicly and explicitly before the trip, we want to sell India as much energy as they will buy. We are at historic levels of U.S. production and export. We want to be a bigger part of their portfolio. Third, the Quad to be strengthened. Washington wants India more deeply integrated into the Indo-Pacific security architecture as a counterweight to China. Fourth, defense cooperation, potentially including a deal for P-8 Marne Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, highly advanced planes with integrated Indian electronic warfare systems, among other equipment. Fifth, an end to India's large-scale purchases of Russian oil and weapons. What did India give? India gave a commitment to intensify trade negotiations, but on India's terms. Jaishankar was unambiguous. India will not open its agricultural market wholesale. India will not expose its farming sector, which employs hundreds of millions of people, to American multinationals simply because Washington demands it. Selective openings, yes. Wholesale capitulation, no. On energy, India said it will consider American energy as part of its diversified supply mix at competitive prices, not as a replacement for Russian oil, not under American diktat, as one option among several. Interestingly, Rubio himself raised Venezuela in this context, noting that the interim Venezuelan president was traveling to India the following week and that there were opportunities there. A significant acknowledgement that even on the energy question, Washington accepts India will buy from wherever makes strategic and economic sense. On the Quad, India reaffirmed its commitment to the Quad as a framework for maritime democracies. But India was equally clear that the Quad must not become a NATO equivalent for the Indo-Pacific, a binding military alliance that commits India to automatic confrontation with China. India reserves the right to manage its own China relationship, which it shares a land border with independently. On defense cooperation, discussions continued. The relationship in this area has consistently been productive. American weapons systems are genuinely excellent, as Indian defense analysts acknowledge, and there are multiple areas of complementarity. On Russian oil, India gave nothing, because India has nothing to give on this. India buys Russian oil because it is economical, because India's refineries are equipped to process it, and because it delivers real savings to real Indians. America accepting this reality and moving on was itself a significant shift in Washington's posture. America came asking for much and left with a functional, productive relationship that had been substantially repaired, but not on American terms, on the terms of an equal partnership. There was something in Rubio's itinerary that deserves a moment of reflection. Alongside the high-level meetings, the press conferences, the Quad Summit, Rubio went to the Taj Mahal. He went to the Amber Fort in Jaipur. He spent time experiencing India as a civilization, not just as a geopolitical variable. When asked about this, Rubio said, "It is important to show respect to the culture of the countries that you visit. The Taj Mahal is one of the wonders of the world. India is a big country with a lot of diversity and a tremendous history." He also said something quietly revealing. He compared his India visit to his first China visit, both trips to the two largest countries in the world by population, and said, "India is a democracy. It is a strong strategic ally of the United States. The two countries are very different. That distinction, democracy, strategic ally, different from China, is not accidental language from a Secretary of State. It is deliberate positioning. America is making a long-term bet. The bet is that India, a democracy with deep civilizational ties to the values of pluralism, rule of law, and open society, is a fundamentally more reliable, more compatible, more trustworthy long-term partner than China. India does not need to be flattered by this assessment. India has known its own worth for a long time. But it is worth noting, the same America that called India a hellhole months ago is now sending its top diplomat to stand reverently before the Taj Mahal and speak about India's tremendous history. Step back from the specific events of this week and a much larger picture comes into focus. America did not come to India this week because of one diplomatic crisis. America came to India this week because of a decade of transformation that made India impossible to ignore, impossible to pressure, and impossible to take for granted. Think about what has changed in just the past few years. India concluded a free trade agreement with the European Union, described by both sides as the mother of all trade deals, while negotiations with America remain ongoing. India now has trade deals with the UK and New Zealand as well. India is no longer dependent on any single major trading relationship. India's digital infrastructure, Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, has become a global model. Countries around the world are studying and adopting India's digital public infrastructure stack. The country that was once described as technologically backward is now the country that others copy. India landed on the moon's south pole, a first for humanity. ISRO's Chandrayaan-3 achieved what no other space agency had managed, at a fraction of the cost of comparable Western missions. India is now a serious defense exporter. BrahMos missiles have gone to the Philippines. Advanced systems are going to Vietnam. And as we covered in previous videos, India has just secured a historic semiconductor partnership with ASML, the Dutch company whose machines China has been banned from accessing, positioning India in the global chip supply chain for the first time. India's economy is the world's fifth largest and growing faster than any other major economy. Manufacturing is booming as global companies diversify away from China. Apple makes iPhones in India. Samsung is expanding in India. Global semiconductor and data center investment is flowing into India. And militarily, Operation Sindoor demonstrated to anyone who needed reminding that India's military is not a symbolic force. It is a precise, capable, rapidly modernizing instrument that achieved its objective swiftly and ended the conflict on India's terms. All of this context is why America came this week with respect rather than pressure. All of this context is why Jaishankar could say India first to America's top diplomat and have it received as a reasonable, legitimate position rather than an act of defiance. All of this context is why India could maintain strong ties with Russia in front of the American Secretary of State and have it accepted as reality rather than challenged as betrayal. Power does not ask for respect. Power earns respect and then commands it. India earned it. So where does the India-US relationship go from here? The honest assessment from the analysts and diplomats who spoke this week: one visit cannot undo the damage of one difficult year. Trust takes time to rebuild. The scars from the tariffs, the hellhole post, the Operation Sindoor credit dispute, these do not disappear after 4 days of good meetings. But direction matters, and the direction has changed. America has signaled, through this visit, through the Quad engagement, through Trump's personal call to the embassy event, that it understands India's importance and is willing to engage on terms closer to mutual respect. India has signaled, through Jaishankar's press conference, through the measured protocol of the visit, through its continued independent foreign policy, that it is open to a stronger relationship but will not compromise its strategic autonomy to get one. The two signals are compatible. They are the foundation of a relationship between genuine equals. India hopes, and there are indications this may happen, that President Trump himself will visit India in the second half of 2026, that a Quad leader summit will take place in New Delhi, that the heads of state relationship between Modi and Trump will restore the warmth that exists at the personal level to the institutional level as well. If that happens, it will be because India held its ground this week, because Jaishankar said India first without blinking, because India did not trade away its strategic autonomy for the sake of a photo opportunity. Patient diplomacy, principled engagement, strategic confidence. That is what India brought to this week, and the world noticed. India is not asking to be treated as an equal anymore. India simply is one. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, with facts, with depth, with the pride they deserve. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, because this is not just content. This is history, unfolding in real time. We will see you in the next one.